March 1944. Somewhere on the Eastern Front, Soviet-occupied Poland. The massive Tiger I tank sat hull down behind a destroyed barn, its 88mm gun trained on the muddy road where Soviet T-34 tanks would soon appear. Inside the turret, Oberfeldwebel Kurt Knispel peered through his gun sight with the focused intensity that had made him the most lethal tank gunner on the Eastern Front. His loader stood ready with another armor-piercing round. His driver waited for the command to reverse after firing. His radio operator scanned frequencies for enemy communications. This was Kurt Knispel's domain, the interior of a German tank where his extraordinary talent for destroying enemy armor had elevated him from rebellious troublemaker to legendary warrior. By March 1944, Knispel had personally destroyed over 150 enemy tanks, more than any other tank crewman in any army during World War II. Yet most Germans had never heard his name. He wore no Knight's Cross around his neck despite earning it multiple times over. He held the rank of sergeant when his kill count qualified him for field promotion to officer dozens of times. Kurt Knispel remained an enlisted man and an unknown soldier not because he lacked skill or courage, but because he possessed something the Nazi regime valued far less than military effectiveness: a conscience and the courage to act on it. His refusal to tolerate mistreatment of prisoners and civilians, his open contempt for SS ideology, and his defiant individualism made him simultaneously the Wehrmacht's most effective tank killer and one of its most problematic soldiers from a political perspective. The story of how a working-class Czech boy became Germany's deadliest tank ace while maintaining his humanity in an inhuman war reveals truths about courage, skill, and moral choices that transcend the specific battles he fought. Kurt Knispel was born on September 20, 1921, in Salisfeld, Sudetenland, a German-speaking region of Czechoslovakia that would be annexed by Nazi Germany in 1938. His father worked as a machine operator in a local factory. His mother managed their modest household. The family was working-class, German-speaking, and unremarkably ordinary in a region where German and Czech populations had coexisted for centuries with varying degrees of tension. Young Kurt showed mechanical aptitude from an early age, understanding how engines and machines functioned with an intuitive grasp that would later translate directly to understanding tank mechanics and gunnery. He was a large boy, physically strong, with a stubborn streak that frequently got him into trouble with teachers and local authorities. He was not a model student or a natural leader. He was simply a tough, mechanically minded young man who preferred working with his hands to sitting in classrooms. When Germany annexed the Sudetenland in 1938 following the Munich Agreement, 17-year-old Kurt found himself transformed from Czech citizen to German national without changing his address. The annexation brought German military conscription to the region. In 1940, at age 19, Kurt Knispel was drafted into the Wehrmacht and assigned to panzer units based on his mechanical aptitude and physical strength. His initial military training took place at tank schools where new recruits learned the fundamentals of armored warfare. The German panzer forces in 1940 were the most advanced and effective armored units in the world, having just demonstrated devastating effectiveness in the invasions of Poland and France. The doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and coordinated combined arms tactics that integrated tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support. Kurt excelled at gunnery training. The skills required for effective tank gunnery: calculating range, leading moving targets, compensating for vehicle movement and weather conditions, maintaining focus under stress, matched his natural abilities perfectly. His instructors noted his exceptional marksmanship and his ability to remain calm during simulated combat exercises. But they also noted disciplinary problems. Kurt questioned orders he considered stupid. He argued with superior officers. He showed open disrespect for Nazi Party ideology and refused to participate in political indoctrination sessions with appropriate enthusiasm. In a normal military organization, such behavior would have resulted in punishment or reassignment to less critical duties. But the Wehrmacht had a problem. Kurt Knispel could hit targets that other gunners missed. During training exercises, his accuracy rates exceeded those of soldiers who had been in tank units for years. When assigned to a Panzer IV medium tank as a gunner, He demonstrated the ability to hit moving targets at ranges that other crews considered impossible. The German military faced a choice that would be repeated throughout Kurt's career: punish his insubordination and lose an extraordinary combat talent, or tolerate his behavior and deploy him where his skills could kill the most enemies. They chose the latter, establishing a pattern that would persist throughout the war. Kurt's first combat assignment came in 1941 when he was posted to the 12th Panzer Division as a gunner in a Panzer IV. The division was being prepared for Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union scheduled for June 22, 1941. The Panzer IV was Germany's most numerous medium tank at the time, armed with a 75mm gun that could engage both enemy tanks and infantry positions. It was reliable, reasonably armored, and formed the backbone of panzer divisions. Kurt's tank commander was an experienced officer who had fought in Poland and France. He recognized immediately that his new gunner possessed unusual talent but also unusual attitude problems. During training exercises before Barbarossa, Kurt repeatedly demonstrated his ability to hit targets on the first shot at ranges where most gunners needed multiple attempts. But he also repeatedly clashed with superior officers over issues that seemed trivial to military discipline but were fundamental to Kurt's sense of right and wrong. On one occasion during pre-invasion training, Kurt witnessed SS troops beating Soviet prisoners of war who had been captured during border skirmishes before the official invasion began. Kurt intervened physically, pulling an SS officer away from a prisoner and threatening violence if the beating continued. This was extraordinarily dangerous behavior. The SS had authority to execute Wehrmacht soldiers for interfering with their operations. Kurt's tank commander had to intervene personally with SS leadership to prevent Kurt from being arrested and likely executed. The incident established Kurt's reputation as someone who would not tolerate mistreatment of prisoners or civilians regardless of consequences. This reputation would follow him throughout his career, protecting him to some degree because even SS officers hesitated to move against someone who had killed so many enemy tanks. But it also ensured he would never receive the recognition or promotion his combat record warranted. Operation Barbarossa began at dawn on June 22, 1941. Kurt Knispel's Panzer IV advanced into Soviet territory as part of the 12th Panzer Division's thrust toward Leningrad. The initial days of the invasion were catastrophic for Soviet forces. German panzer divisions encircled and destroyed entire Soviet armies. Tens of thousands of Soviet tanks were destroyed or captured. The Red Army's initial response was chaotic and ineffective. Kurt's first combat kill came on the third day of the invasion. His Panzer IV encountered a column of Soviet T-26 light tanks attempting to counterattack German infantry positions. The T-26 was obsolete, lightly armored, and completely outmatched by the Panzer IV's 75mm gun. Kurt destroyed 3 T-20 SIXS in rapid succession at a range of approximately 800 meters. Each shot penetrated the thin armor and detonated the ammunition inside, killing the crews instantly. Kurt's reaction to his first kills was not triumph or excitement but a grim recognition of what he had done. He had killed men, burned them alive inside their tanks. They were enemies trying to kill him, legitimate military targets in a declared war. But they were also human beings who had died terrible deaths. This moral complexity would characterize Kurt's entire combat experience. He was extraordinarily effective at killing enemy tankers, but he never celebrated their deaths or treated combat as sport. Throughout the summer and fall of 1941, Kurt's kill count rose steadily. His Panzer IV destroyed dozens of Soviet tanks, T-20 SIXS, T-28s, BT-7s, and the occasional T-34 or KV-1. The early Soviet tanks were often poorly deployed, inadequately supported by infantry, and operated by crews with minimal training. German panzer tactics were superior. German gunnery training was more thorough. And Kurt Knispel was exceptional even among German gunners. By December 1941, when the German advance ground to a halt outside Moscow, Kurt had destroyed approximately 40 enemy tanks. This was an extraordinary total for 6 months of combat. Most tank gunners never achieved double-digit kills during entire military careers. Kurt had established himself as one of the most effective anti-tank gunners in the Wehrmacht. But December 1941 also brought the Soviet winter counteroffensive that drove German forces back from Moscow and demonstrated that the Red Army was far from defeated. Kurt's Panzer IV fought desperate defensive battles in sub-zero temperatures, mechanical breakdowns, and fuel shortages. The invincible Wehrmacht that had conquered Poland in weeks and France in 6 weeks was suddenly retreating, taking heavy casualties, losing equipment it could not replace. Kurt's tank was knocked out twice during the winter fighting. The first time, a Soviet anti-tank gun hit the Panzer IV's turret, jamming the traverse mechanism and wounding Kurt's commander. Kurt took over command of the tank temporarily, directed the driver to reverse to safety, and supervised repairs that got the vehicle operational again within hours. The second time, the transmission failed in sub-zero cold, leaving the tank immobilized under Soviet artillery fire. Kurt and his crew abandoned the vehicle and fought as infantry until they could reach German lines and be assigned a replacement tank. These experiences taught Kurt that courage and skill mattered, but so did luck and mechanical reliability. The best gunner in the world was useless if his tank broke down or ran out of fuel. The Eastern Front was not the clean, decisive armored warfare that German doctrine envisioned. It was brutal attrition where both sides lost massive amounts of equipment and men, and victory went to whoever could sustain losses longer. By spring 1942, Kurt had been promoted to Unteroffizier, corporal, and assigned as gunner to a new Panzer IV with improved armor and a longer 75mm gun. His reputation was spreading within panzer units. Commanders requested him by name. Other crews studied his techniques. He became informal instructor for new gunners, teaching them how to estimate range, how to lead moving targets, how to identify weak points in Soviet tank armor. But Kurt's reputation for insubordination was also spreading. He had been formally reprimanded multiple times for refusing direct orders, for arguing with superior officers, for intervening when he witnessed mistreatment of prisoners or civilians. On one occasion, he physically prevented SS Einsatzgruppen troops from executing a group of Jewish civilians in a Ukrainian village. This incident nearly resulted in court-martial. Only intervention by his division commander, who valued Kurt's combat effectiveness and quietly sympathized with his moral objections, prevented serious consequences. The summer of 1942 brought renewed German offensives in southern Russia, driving toward the Caucasus oil fields and the city of Stalingrad. Kurt's unit participated in these operations, fighting across the open steppes where tank battles could be decided at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Kurt's kill count continued rising. He destroyed T-34s, the Soviet medium tank that was arguably superior to the Panzer IV in armor and firepower. He destroyed KV-1 heavy tanks that most German tanks could not penetrate frontally. He developed techniques for hitting weak points, turret rings, driver's vision ports, engine decks, that could disable even heavily armored vehicles. By the end of 1942, Kurt Knispel had destroyed approximately 90 enemy tanks. He was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, a significant decoration but far below what his combat record warranted. Knight's Cross recipients typically had kill counts half of Kurt's total. The reason for this disparity was political. Kurt's repeated defiance of Nazi ideology, his protection of prisoners and civilians, his open contempt for SS methods, made him unacceptable for high-profile recognition. The turning point in Kurt's combat career came in late 1942 when he was transferred to a Tiger I heavy tank battalion. The Tiger I was Germany's answer to Soviet heavy tanks, a 56-ton monster armed with the legendary 88mm gun and protected by armor that Soviet anti-tank weapons could rarely penetrate. The Tiger was expensive, mechanically complex, and produced in limited numbers. It was assigned only to elite heavy tank battalions where the best crews could maximize its capabilities. Kurt was assigned as gunner to Tiger No. 217, commanded by an officer who valued Kurt's skills enough to tolerate his attitude. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. For a gunner of Kurt's caliber, the Tiger was the perfect weapon, powerful enough to kill any target, accurate enough to hit at extreme range, and protected well enough to give him time to work. January 1943. The Eastern Front near Kharkov, Ukraine. Kurt Knispel's Tiger I tank sat in a defensive position overlooking a snow-covered valley where Soviet armor would soon advance. The Tiger's massive 88mm gun, the same weapon that had proven devastating as an anti-aircraft and anti-tank gun throughout the war, gave Kurt capabilities no other gunner possessed. At ranges where most tank battles were decided, 800 to 1,200 meters, the Tiger could kill with near certainty. At extreme ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, where other tanks couldn't reliably hit targets, Kurt could still destroy enemy armor. The Tiger's interior was more spacious than the cramped Panzer IV Kurt had fought in previously. The commander sat in the turret with excellent vision through periscopes and the cupola. Kurt occupied the gunner's position to the commander's left, peering through the articulated gun sight that offered 2.5x magnification. The loader stood to the right of the breech, ready to load the massive 88mm rounds that weighed over 20 pounds each. The driver and radio operator occupied the hull, forward of the fighting compartment. This crew had been together for 3 months, developing the coordination and trust that separated effective tank crews from dead ones. Kurt's commander understood his gunner's capabilities and limitations. He positioned the Tiger to maximize Kurt's sight lines and gave him time to acquire targets properly. The loader worked with mechanical precision, maintaining the rate of fire Kurt needed. The driver responded instantly to commands, backing the 60-ton vehicle to cover after firing or repositioning to new firing positions. On this particular January morning, Soviet reconnaissance had detected the German defensive line and was probing for weak points. Kurt spotted the first T-34 at approximately 1,800 meters, barely visible through falling snow. The Soviet tank was moving cautiously, turret traversing as it searched for German positions. Most gunners would have waited for the T-34 to close to 1,000 meters or less before engaging. Kurt didn't wait. He called the range to his commander. 80-80, Panzergranate, T-34, 1800, indicating armor-piercing ammunition at 1,800 meters. The loader slammed the round home. Kurt made minute adjustments for range, wind, and the Tiger's slight hold-down angle. He squeezed the trigger. The 88mm gun roared, the massive recoil rocking the 60-ton tank slightly despite its weight. Through his sight, Kurt watched the tracer arc downrange and strike the T-34 precisely on the turret front. The Soviet tank exploded, turret blown completely off the hull by the detonating ammunition. Before the T-34's crew could have known they were hit, they were dead. At 1,800 meters in falling snow, they likely never saw the Tiger. They died instantly, burned or shredded by the explosion, killed by a gunner they never knew existed. This was Kurt Knispel's terrible gift, the ability to kill with such precision and at such range that his enemies often died without understanding what had killed them. More T-34s appeared, a full company advancing in line formation. Kurt destroyed them methodically. Second T-34 at 1,650 meters, turret hit, explosion. Third T-34 at 1,500 meters, hull hit, fire. Fourth T-34 at 1,400 meters, turret hit, catastrophic ammunition detonation. The Soviet company broke and retreated, leaving 4 burning wrecks in the snow. The engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes. Kurt had fired 4 shots and achieved 4 kills. His loader had maintained the rate of fire. His commander had kept him informed of targets and threats. The crew functioned as a single organism. This was not unusual for Kurt. Throughout early 1943, as German and Soviet forces battled for control of Kharkov and the surrounding territory, Kurt's Tiger destroyed Soviet armor at a rate that seemed impossible. Some days he killed 5 or 6 tanks. Other days he killed none because no targets appeared. But when Soviet armor came within range of his 88mm gun, it usually died. By March 1943, Kurt had destroyed over 120 enemy tanks total, including approximately 30 in his Tiger. He was becoming known throughout the panzer forces as the most effective tank gunner on the Eastern Front. But he remained a sergeant, still wore no Knight's Cross, and received no public recognition. The Nazi propaganda machine that celebrated other tank aces ignored Kurt because his political unreliability made him unsuitable for public hero status. Kurt didn't care about recognition. He cared about his crew surviving, about killing enemy tanks before they could kill German infantry, and about maintaining some measure of humanity in an increasingly inhuman war. When his Tiger battalion captured Soviet tank crews, Kurt ensured they received proper treatment. When he witnessed SS troops preparing to execute prisoners, he intervened with the full authority of his combat reputation. Other soldiers might not have survived such interventions. Kurt's kill count gave him protection. Even SS officers hesitated to move against someone who had destroyed 120 enemy tanks. The summer of 1943 brought Operation Citadel, Germany's massive offensive at Kursk that would become the largest tank battle in history. Kurt's Tiger battalion was assigned to the northern pincer of the German attack, facing Soviet defenses that included thousands of anti-tank guns, minefields, and dug-in armor. The Soviets had prepared for months, creating defensive belts that would bleed the German armored formations white. Kurt's Tiger advanced into this maelstrom on July 5, 1943. The first day of Citadel was unlike anything he had experienced. Soviet anti-tank guns fired from camouflaged positions at point-blank range. Mines disabled tanks that had survived years of combat. Soviet armor appeared in numbers that exceeded German intelligence estimates by factors of 2 or 3. The Tiger's armor protected Kurt's crew from most Soviet weapons, but even Tigers could be killed by concentrated fire, by mines, by mechanical breakdown under combat stress. Kurt destroyed 11 tanks during the first 3 days at Kursk. T-34s, T-70 light tanks, a KV-1 heavy tank, and a Lend-Lease Churchill tank from Britain. Each kill required different techniques. The T-34s he engaged at long range, using the Tiger's superior gun to kill before they could close to effective range. The KV-1 required a carefully aimed shot at the turret ring where armor was thinnest. The Churchill, with its heavy armor, needed multiple hits before the crew abandoned the vehicle. But Kursk was a German defeat despite tactical successes. Soviet defenses absorbed the German attacks, inflicted unsustainable casualties, and demonstrated that the Red Army had learned how to stop panzer offensives. After 2 weeks of brutal fighting, Germany called off the offensive. Kurt's Tiger battalion had destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks but had lost over half its own vehicles to combat damage, mechanical failure, and mine strikes. The Tiger that Kurt had fought in since January 1943 was one of the few that survived Kursk operationally intact. The period after Kursk marked the beginning of Germany's long retreat on the Eastern Front. From summer 1943 until war's end in May 1945, German forces would fight almost continuously on the defensive, trading space for time, trying to slow Soviet advances while suffering casualties they could not replace. Kurt's Tiger fought in this grinding defensive warfare, destroying Soviet armor in ambushes and defensive battles but always retreating, always outnumbered, always facing enemies whose quality improved as German strength declined. Kurt's kill count continued rising. By the end of 1943, he had destroyed over 140 enemy tanks. He had survived being knocked out twice more, once when a Soviet 76mm anti-tank gun hit his Tiger's track, immobilizing it until repairs could be made, and once when a T-34 achieved a lucky hit on the Tiger's drive sprocket at close range during a confused meeting engagement in a Ukrainian village. In early 1944, Kurt's Tiger battalion was withdrawn from the front for rest and refit. The surviving Tigers needed major maintenance after months of continuous combat. The crews needed rest, though true rest was impossible with Soviet offensives driving westward. During this brief respite, Kurt was promoted to Oberfeldwebel, senior sergeant, the highest enlisted rank. His commander recommended him for field promotion to lieutenant. The recommendation was rejected. Kurt Knispel's political file contained too many incidents of insubordination, too many interventions on behalf of prisoners, too many arguments with SS officers. Kurt returned to combat in March 1944, still a sergeant, still politically unacceptable, still the most effective tank killer in the Wehrmacht. His new Tiger, number 424, was a later production model with slightly improved armor and mechanical refinements. The crew was largely the same men he had fought with for months. They knew each other's habits, anticipated reactions, functioned with the wordless coordination that only shared combat produces. The Soviet spring offensive of 1944 was overwhelming. The Red Army attacked with numerical superiority that German forces could not match. Soviet tanks appeared in formations of 50, 80, sometimes over 100 vehicles. Soviet artillery fired barrages that lasted hours. Soviet infantry attacked in waves that absorbed casualties and kept coming. Germany was losing the war of attrition, losing it badly, bleeding trained soldiers and irreplaceable equipment in defensive battles that only delayed inevitable defeat. Kurt's Tiger fought in this maelstrom, killing Soviet armor at a rate that would have seemed impossible if not documented by multiple witnesses and official records. On some days, he destroyed 8 or 10 tanks. His technique had been refined over 3 years of combat. He knew exactly where to hit T-34s to guarantee kills. He could estimate range by terrain features with uncanny accuracy. He remained calm under fire when other gunners panicked. He was, quite simply, the most lethal tank gunner of World War II. By autumn 1944, Kurt had destroyed over 160 enemy tanks, a total that exceeded any other tank crewman in any army. Soviet tankers who survived encounters with his Tiger reported fighting a German tank that killed at impossible ranges with impossible accuracy. But the Tiger's mechanical reliability was deteriorating under constant combat stress. Spare parts were increasingly scarce. Trained replacement crews were no longer available. Germany was losing the industrial and manpower war so completely that individual skill, no matter how extraordinary, could no longer affect the outcome. Winter 1945. Czechoslovakia, near the town of Wostitz. Kurt Knispel's Tiger I tank retreated westward along muddy roads clogged with Wehrmacht remnants, civilian refugees, and the chaotic debris of a collapsing army. The Eastern Front no longer existed as a coherent defensive line. Soviet forces advanced on multiple axes, encircling German units, overwhelming defensive positions, pushing inexorably toward Berlin. The Third Reich was dying, and everyone except the most fanatical Nazis understood that defeat was inevitable. Kurt's Tiger was now one of perhaps 24 operational Tigers remaining on the entire Eastern Front. Most had been destroyed in combat, abandoned due to mechanical failure, or blown up by their own crews to prevent capture. The 60-ton vehicles required massive amounts of fuel that Germany no longer possessed, spare parts that factories no longer produced, and trained crews that no longer existed. Kurt's Tiger ran on fuel siphoned from abandoned vehicles, operated with jury-rigged repairs, and fought knowing that every battle might be its last. The crew had changed since 1943. Kurt's original commander had been killed in action in late 1944, hit by artillery shrapnel while commanding from the open hatch. The replacement commander was a young lieutenant, recently promoted, who deferred to Kurt's combat experience. The loader was on his third Tiger, having survived the destruction of 2 previous vehicles. The driver had been with Kurt for over a year, long enough to develop the instinctive coordination that kept the massive tank mobile under fire. The radio operator was new, barely trained, assigned to the Tiger because there were no other positions available. They were exhausted men operating a nearly worn-out machine in a lost cause. But they were still dangerous. Kurt's kill count had reached 168 enemy tanks by early April 1945, making him statistically the most successful tank destroyer in military history. Even in retreat, even outnumbered 10 or 20 to 1, Kurt's Tiger killed Soviet armor whenever it came within range of his 88mm gun. On April 15, 1945, Kurt's Tiger engaged Soviet tanks for what would be the last time. A column of T-34 divided by 85s, the improved Soviet medium tank with an 85mm gun that could threaten even Tigers frontally, was advancing along a road toward German defensive positions. Kurt's Tiger was positioned hull down behind an earthen embankment, only the turret visible to approaching Soviet tanks. The engagement began at 1,600 meters when Kurt identified the lead T-34/85 through his sight. The Soviet tanks were advancing in column formation, not deployed for combat, apparently believing German forces in the area had already retreated. They were wrong. Kurt's first shot struck the lead T-34/85 in the turret, penetrating the armor and detonating the ammunition inside. The tank exploded, blocking the road. The column halted, tanks beginning to deploy off-road to bypass the wreck. Kurt destroyed the second T-34/85 at 1,450 meters as it maneuvered around the burning lead tank. Third kill at 1,380 meters, another turret hit, another catastrophic ammunition detonation. The Soviet column was now reacting, tanks traversing turrets to search for the German threat, but in their hasty deployment they presented perfect targets to a gunner of Kurt's caliber. 4th T-34/85 destroyed at 1,200 meters. 5th at 1,100 meters. The Soviet tankers finally identified Kurt's position and began returning fire. 85mm rounds impacted around the Tiger, throwing up geysers of mud and dirt but missing the narrow target of the hull-down turret. Kurt remained focused, acquiring his sixth target, a T-34/85 that had closed to 950 meters. The shot penetrated the Soviet tank's hull just below the turret ring, killing the driver instantly and setting the engine compartment on fire. The surviving crew bailed out, running from their burning tank. Kurt did not fire on the fleeing tankers. He never shot at crews escaping destroyed vehicles. They were disarmed enemies, no longer combatants, and Kurt's personal code did not permit killing helpless men regardless of what military regulations allowed. The Soviet column retreated, leaving 6 burning T-34 divided by 85s along the road. Kurt's Tiger had expended 14 rounds, 6 kills and 8 misses or non-penetrating hits. For Kurt, this was actually below his usual accuracy rate, a sign of the fatigue and stress that even the best gunner could not completely overcome after 4 years of continuous combat. But the engagement had revealed the Tiger's position. Soviet artillery began ranging in on the coordinates, 122mm shells impacting closer with each salvo. Kurt's commander ordered retreat. The Tiger backed down from its firing position, reversed into a tree line, and began moving westward along forest trails too narrow for the massive tank. Branches scraped the turret. The tracks churned mud. The Maybach engine labored under maximum load. They were running again, always running, knowing that eventually there would be nowhere left to run. Over the next few days, Kurt's Tiger moved from position to position, fighting brief engagements, destroying isolated Soviet tanks, retreating before Soviet forces could concentrate against them. The crew survived on whatever food they could scavenge. They slept inside the Tiger, taking turns on watch. They knew Germany was defeated. They knew the war was ending. But they continued fighting because surrendering to Soviet forces meant almost certain death. Soviet treatment of SS prisoners was brutal, and even Wehrmacht tankers who had killed as many Red Army soldiers as Kurt could expect no mercy. Kurt's final recorded tank kill came on April 22, 1945, when his Tiger engaged a Soviet IS-2 heavy tank at relatively close range during a confused action near the town of Wostitz. The IS-2 was the Soviet Union's answer to the Tiger, armed with a massive 122mm gun that could penetrate Tiger armor at normal combat ranges. The two heavy tanks spotted each other simultaneously at approximately 800 meters. Kurt fired first. The 88mm armor-piercing round struck the IS-2's turret at an oblique angle, penetrating and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The Soviet heavy tank slewed to a stop, smoke pouring from the commander's hatch. Kurt's loader was already ramming home another round, but the IS-2's crew was bailing out, the tank disabled even if not completely destroyed. Kurt held fire. The engagement had lasted perhaps 15 seconds from first sighting to Soviet evacuation. This was Kurt Knispel's 168th confirmed tank kill, though the actual total was almost certainly higher. Many of Kurt's kills during the chaotic final months of the war were not properly documented. His Tiger destroyed numerous Soviet tanks in engagements where no one survived to file official reports, where records were lost in retreats, where the Wehrmacht's collapsing administrative structure simply stopped tracking individual achievements. Military historians studying post-war records have estimated Kurt's actual kill total might have exceeded 190, or even 200 tanks, but only 168 can be confirmed through surviving documentation. Regardless of the exact number, Kurt Knispel destroyed more enemy tanks than any other soldier in any army during World War II. His closest competitors, other German tank aces like Otto Carius, Michael Wittmann, and Johannes Bolter, had totals ranging from 150 to 160 confirmed kills. Soviet, American, and British tank crews rarely exceeded 20 to 30 kills during entire careers. Kurt's achievement was not just numerical superiority, but the consistency and duration of his performance. He fought from 1941 to 1945, almost 4 full years of continuous combat. He fought in Panzer IVs and Tigers, in offensive operations and desperate defensive battles, against obsolete Soviet light tanks and modern IS-2 heavy tanks. He maintained extraordinary effectiveness throughout, killing enemy armor with mechanical precision regardless of circumstances. But statistics and kill counts tell only part of Kurt's story. The more important story was how he maintained his humanity while becoming history's most effective tank killer. Kurt never celebrated his kills. He never boasted about his achievements. He treated enemy prisoners with dignity when other German soldiers were brutalizing them. He protected civilians when SS troops were murdering them. He defied orders he considered immoral even when such defiance risked his life. On April 28, 1945, Kurt Knispel died near Wastitz, Czechoslovakia, under circumstances that remain somewhat unclear. The most reliable accounts indicate that his Tiger was engaging Soviet forces when it was hit by artillery fire or anti-tank rounds that penetrated the thinner rear armor. Kurt was severely wounded. Accounts mention shrapnel wounds to his torso and head. He died either immediately from his wounds or shortly afterward, possibly while being evacuated by surviving crew members. Some accounts suggest Kurt survived the initial wounding and died in a field hospital several days later. Others indicate he died in the tank, or immediately after being extracted from the wreck. The confusion reflects the chaos of the war's final days when accurate record-keeping had completely broken down and German units were being overrun or surrendering in mass formations. What is certain is that Kurt Knispel died in combat in late April 1945, just days before Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8. He was 23 years old. He had fought for nearly 4 years. He had destroyed 168 confirmed enemy tanks and likely many more. He had survived being knocked out multiple times, wounded at least twice, and exposed to continuous combat stress that broke lesser men. And he died as he had lived, fighting not for Nazi ideology that he despised, but for his crew, for the soldiers who depended on his skills, and perhaps simply because he knew no other way to survive. Kurt was buried in a military cemetery near Wastitz. After the war, when Czechoslovakia came under Soviet control, many German military graves were destroyed or left unmarked. Kurt's exact burial location was lost for decades. His death was not announced in German newspapers. Nazi propaganda had never acknowledged his achievements because his political unreliability made him unsuitable for hero status. He died as he had lived, unknown. Kurt Knispel's story remained almost completely unknown for nearly 4 decades after his death. While other German tank aces became subjects of books, documentaries, and historical studies, Kurt was forgotten, a deliberate omission that reveals as much about how wars are remembered as it does about the man himself. The most celebrated German tank ace during and after the war was Michael Wittmann, an SS officer who destroyed approximately 138 tanks before being killed in Normandy in August 1944. Wittmann received the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, was featured prominently in Nazi propaganda, and after the war became the subject of numerous books and articles. His tactics were studied in military academies. His achievements were commemorated by veteran organizations. He became the archetypical German tank ace in popular and academic histories of armored warfare. Kurt Knispel destroyed 30 more tanks than Wittmann, a difference larger than the entire career totals of most tank gunners. Yet Kurt received no Knight's Cross, no propaganda coverage, no post-war recognition. The reason was simple. Whitman was SS, politically reliable, an acceptable hero for Nazi ideology. Kurt was Wehrmacht, politically problematic, someone who had repeatedly defied SS authority and protected their intended victims. Nazi propaganda required heroes who embodied regime values, racial superiority, ideological commitment, ruthless execution of orders regardless of moral considerations. Kurt embodied none of these values. He was a working-class Czech-German who showed no interest in Nazi ideology, who openly protected prisoners and civilians, who argued with superior officers, who valued human decency over military discipline. His extraordinary combat effectiveness could not overcome his political unreliability. The Nazi regime needed heroes it could control, and Kurt Knispel could not be controlled. This wartime suppression of Kurt's achievements continued into the post-war period for different reasons. In West Germany during the 1950s and 1960s, Wehrmacht veterans organizations and military historians focused on figures like Whitman who could be presented as professional soldiers fighting for Germany rather than for Nazism. But Whitman's SS membership complicated this narrative, requiring careful contextualization and occasional apologetic. Kurt should have been the perfect subject for this rehabilitation narrative, a Wehrmacht soldier who fought with extraordinary courage and skill while maintaining human decency. But Kurt's story remained unknown because the records documenting his achievements had been lost, scattered, or destroyed during the war's chaotic final months. His burial site was unknown. His surviving crew members were scattered across post-war Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia with no organization or motivation to publicize his achievements. The first serious historical research into Kurt Knispel's combat record came in the 1990s when German military historians gained access to previously classified Wehrmacht personnel files and combat reports. Researchers analyzing tank kill claims discovered an Oberfeldwebel named Kurt Knispel with confirmed kills totaling 168 tanks, a number that exceeded all other documented tank aces. Initial reactions were skeptical. How could the most successful tank ace of World War II have remained completely unknown for 50 years? Researchers suspected exaggerated claims or documentation errors. But cross-referencing multiple sources, unit combat reports, witness statements, award recommendations that had been rejected, confirmed that Kurt Knispel had indeed destroyed at least 168 enemy tanks and possibly many more. The realization that history's most effective tank killer had been essentially forgotten prompted questions about how military achievement is recognized and commemorated. Kurt's obscurity resulted from the intersection of Nazi political requirements during the war, post-war focus on more famous figures, and the loss of documentation that would have established his achievements earlier. But Kurt's story also reveals something more important than just correcting historical omissions. His combination of extraordinary combat effectiveness and maintained humanity demonstrates that moral courage and military skill are not incompatible, that soldiers can kill effectively when necessary while still treating enemies with basic human dignity. Kurt's interventions on behalf of prisoners and civilians were not just acts of individual conscience. They were tactical decisions that enhanced rather than compromised military effectiveness. Tank crews fight more cohesively when they respect their leadership. Soldiers fight more effectively when they believe they are fighting for something beyond mere survival or obedience to orders. Kurt's crew knew their gunner would protect them in combat and would not tolerate mistreatment of prisoners or civilians. This knowledge created unit cohesion and morale that pure discipline could never achieve. Modern military ethics emphasizes the importance of maintaining rules of engagement and laws of armed conflict even during intense combat operations. Kurt Knispel demonstrated this principle decades before it became formal doctrine. He killed enemy combatants with extraordinary efficiency. He destroyed 168 tanks, killing or wounding hundreds of enemy soldiers. But he did not shoot at crews evacuating destroyed vehicles. He protected prisoners from abuse. He intervened when civilians were being mistreated. He maintained the distinction between legitimate military targets and helpless human beings. This moral framework did not make Kurt less effective as a soldier. If anything, it made him more effective because his crew and fellow soldiers knew he operated according to principles rather than merely following orders. In militaries where discipline depends solely on hierarchy and punishment, soldiers comply only when supervised. In units where soldiers trust their leader's judgment and principles, they fight effectively even when direct supervision is impossible. Kurt's technical skills as a gunner were extraordinary, but technical skill alone does not explain 168 tank kills over 4 years of combat. Many German gunners had excellent training and natural talent. What separated Kurt from other skilled gunners was consistency under stress, the ability to maintain focus and precision during the chaos of combat when most soldiers' performance degrades significantly. Kurt's maintained humanity may have contributed to this consistency. Soldiers who view combat as sport or ideological crusade often experience psychological breakdown when the reality of killing overwhelms their initial enthusiasm. Soldiers who view combat as tragic necessity, who acknowledge the humanity of enemies while still fighting effectively, may be better able to sustain combat performance over extended periods without psychological collapse. This is speculation. No psychological studies of Kurt Knispel exist. But his 4-year combat career without apparent breakdown, his maintained effectiveness from 1941 to 1945, and his crew's loyalty suggests that his moral framework helped rather than hindered his military performance. Kurt's grave location remained unknown until 2013 when German researchers finally identified his burial site in a cemetery near Wastitz, Czechoslovakia. The grave had been unmarked for decades, the wooden cross that originally marked it having rotted away. Czech authorities cooperated with German veterans organizations to install a permanent marker identifying Kurt Knispel and commemorating his service. The memorial's inscription is simple, listing his name, rank, birth and death dates, and service record. It does not glorify war or celebrate killing. It acknowledges a soldier who fought with extraordinary skill while maintaining human decency in circumstances that encouraged brutality. The memorial's simplicity seems appropriate for someone who never sought recognition and who valued crew survival over personal glory. Today, Kurt Knispel is recognized by military historians and armor warfare specialists as the most effective tank destroyer of World War II. His tactics are studied by modern armored forces. His ability to estimate range and hit moving targets at extreme distances represented the peak of what human gunners could achieve before computerized fire control systems made such skills obsolete. But Kurt's broader significance extends beyond tactical excellence. He demonstrated that soldiers can fight effectively while maintaining moral principles, that combat success does not require dehumanizing enemies, and that courage includes not just facing enemy fire but also defying immoral orders from one's own side. The Wehrmacht was not a morally admirable organization. It participated in war crimes, supported genocide, and enabled Nazi atrocities throughout occupied Europe. Individual soldiers' decency does not absolve the organization's collective guilt. But within that fundamentally compromised institution, some soldiers like Kurt Knispel tried to maintain humanity while fulfilling military duties. They were not heroes in any uncomplicated sense. They fought for an evil regime even if they personally rejected its ideology. But they demonstrated that even in the worst circumstances, individual moral choices matter. Kurt Knispel killed 168 enemy tanks and hundreds of enemy soldiers. He was extraordinarily effective at his military specialty. But he also protected prisoners, defended civilians, and refused to participate in atrocities. He never celebrated killing. He never boasted about his achievements. He fought because he was conscripted, because his crew depended on him, because desertion or refusal would have meant execution. His legacy is complex, a supremely effective warrior who maintained humanity in inhuman circumstances, a soldier who killed enemies while refusing to hate them, a man who demonstrated extraordinary courage both in combat and in defying immoral authority. He was, in the end, simply a Czech working-class kid who wanted to survive the war, protect his crew, and maintain his sense of right and wrong in a world that seemed determined to destroy both. Kurt Knispel died at 23 years old, unmarried, without children, having spent nearly 4 years in continuous combat. He destroyed more tanks than any other soldier in history. He received almost no recognition during his lifetime and was forgotten for decades after his death. Today, his story is gradually becoming known, teaching new generations that military effectiveness and moral courage are not contradictory, that the best soldiers are not those who kill most enthusiastically, but those who fight most effectively while maintaining their humanity. The Tiger tanks are gone, melted for scrap or displayed in museums. The battlefields where Kurt fought are peaceful farmland and forest. The men he killed are long dead, their families scattered across Russia and the former Soviet Union. But Kurt's example remains relevant for any soldier facing the choice between following orders blindly and maintaining moral principles, between viewing enemies as mere targets and recognizing their humanity even while fighting them. In the end, Kurt Knispel was the deadliest tank ace of World War II not because he loved killing, but because he was extraordinarily skilled at a terrible job he performed with grim necessity rather than enthusiasm. He killed to protect his crew and the soldiers who depended on his skills. He never lost sight of the fact that the men in those burning tanks were human beings whose deaths were tragic even when militarily necessary. That combination, supreme military effectiveness paired with maintained humanity, made Kurt Knispel not just history's most successful tank destroyer, but perhaps its most instructive example of how soldiers should conduct themselves in war. Kill when necessary. Protect when possible. Never forget that enemies are human beings. And never surrender your moral principles even when surrounded by those who have surrendered theirs.